Hey everybody, Chris here from It's Mead Made, and today we are debunking some myths with acrylic paints. Some of those things that I know I personally have gotten some shade for, or some of those things that you might be doing too that might be the right way or wrong way. So I have actually got a special guest today, and we are going to be talking all about paints. So I would like to welcome Corpse Starch, and we'll bring him on.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. So, Corpse Starch, thank you for coming to this live stream. I am super excited for it because we are going to be diving into some stuff that just makes me excited. So, if you wanted to, why don't you take a minute and just kind of give yourself, give your background of who you are and what you do and why we're talking about this stuff.
So, hi, everyone. I'm Corpse Starch. Some people can call me as. That's what I go by professionally. I work in art conservation, and I do a lot of within art conservation. Do a lot of paint chemistry. My job is to do different types of research into the chemical nature of paint and pigments. For instance, finding out different origins of a 1500s type of burnt umber, for instance. But I make a lot of paint, and there's a lot of things with this community that I would like to debunk, and I'm glad to be here as well, too. So.
Awesome. And hi, Chris. See you're on. And for those of you, we're just going to be, I've got a list of questions. Sparky Face, welcome. So I've got a list of questions, and we're going to just go through them. And if you have any questions along the way, please ask them, and we will try to answer them. I probably am not going to, but Corpse Starch is going to be. So the first one is one of the big ones for me. And when it comes to me thinning my paints, I always use distilled water. And that's just something I've always done. And this is actually how Corpse Starch and I connected because of my airbrush paint thinning video. He actually commented on it and said that I was doing some good stuff that he's never seen people like use and some other things, and he corrected me, and that's where this whole thing started because I wanted to know what I was doing wrong.
Yep.
So when it comes to distilled water, that's the first thing. Is that a good thing to use when it comes to thinning acrylic paints, or is it something we shouldn't be doing?
It is the second best thing to use, in fact.
Excellent.
The best thing is deionized water. However, that is very difficult for most people to get. I have a water deionizer, but it cost me almost 15 grand to put it into my house. So,
yeah, but for what you do, I'm sure that's important.
Very. The reason why you would want to also use distilled water over tap water, a lot of people, I see a lot of YouTubers, a lot of just guides out there saying, use tap water, it's fine. You don't. A lot of tap water has additional chemicals in there that actually can affect the pH balance of acrylic paints, and pH balance is really a big thing with them. This can do things like cause cracking, just longevity issues. It couldn't cause some pigments to just completely evaporate. In rare cases, not so much with acrylic paints, but you can find this with oils, you can actually see some pigments, when you alter the pH balance, explode. Just like right there, catch fire.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know even in my, like, the town that I live in, like, we have city water, and it has such a chlorine smell, and that's one of the reasons I was like, no, I'm not going to use this because I'm sure it's not good to just be mixing in my paints. So, and I know it's probably different for every town, so I could imagine how it would like alter your paints in some way.
Oh yeah, you have different mineral content, you have a ton of different things. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Generally speaking, though, you want to have as neutral of a water as possible, and the best is going to be deionized.
Gotcha.
But
distilled water we can get on the shelf, like at any kind of supermarket or gas station even, and
right.
That is it's not just as good, but it's the second best thing to use for, I guess, normal people painting these, like, 3D prints and things like that we're doing.
Oh yeah. There are times when, an acrylic medium will help thinning, but the problem with that is that most acrylic mediums will not thin your paint at all, actually. So the type of paints a lot of people are going to be using are going to be, they're called fluid acrylics. So your typical hobby paint, a lot of craft paints, these are all fluid acrylics. Some of them might be
like this kind of stuff.
yeah. I think I have a bottle of a hobby paint over here.
Yeah, I usually use like Americana. I've got Apple Barrel I use and Folk Art. Like these are the main like more affordable paints that I use a lot. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Game Color, I like Game Color a lot.
Yeah.
But the price difference.
Oh yeah. The price difference between my paints and these paints is also huge. I'll get into that in a second though. But yeah, so these are all fluid acrylics. A normal paint medium isn't going to thin it down because the pigment does not actually affect the viscosity all that much. You can put 50% pigment in there. Don't do that, by the way. The exact ratio is around 4%. So the whole 30 to 50% myth is that's for weight. But yeah, you want specialized mediums like for instance, this golden high flow medium right there. Now, the reason why you would use a medium to thin isn't because it's required for the paint. It's to make bad paint work. When you have a lower grade paint, a medium is going to help you a lot more than water will in some situations when airbrushing. But that's only some situations. This has to do with high humidity and things like that.
Oh, okay. So humidity plays a big factor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Same with temperature. Like different temperatures, you can get different textures when drying. So if you, for instance, put a heat gun over your drying space, it will, sometimes give you an orange peel texture. Higher humidities will also do this type of thing.
Gotcha.
So
what about I assume it's going to be the exact same thing for, say, maybe people that are more out in the country or something like that and have like well water, because like I know there can be iron and all that kind of stuff in well water. So that's probably even worse, right?
Oh, yeah. If you have well water, do yourself a favor. Go buy just distilled water. It's going to do a lot more, including in your wet palette. Always put distilled water in your wet palette. Tap water will actually promote mold blooms in your wet palette.
Really? I didn't know that. So like I've got my little water bottle that I use, and I've never actually used anything but distilled water in it, so I've never noticed that. So that's a really good tip, because I know a lot of people will use wet palettes and just putting regular water in it. I never even dawned on me that you could get mold or anything like that in it.
Oh yeah, it's the same with paint. When I'm trying to do a repair on like an acrylic canvas, I have to make sure that I use distilled water, and if I spot mold within the paint, it means that the artist used tap water. And this is actually a big problem because it means I can't actually restore the painting all that easily.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them, because this is all about painting. So the next question I have for you is, I have been told by multiple people that they will use Windex in their for thinning their paints for their airbrushes. So is that a good thing, a bad thing? I've never used it because it just seems weird to be putting a blue liquid in like your paints, especially if you're using like a white paint or something like that.
So the blue dye shouldn't matter that much. However, that is also a bad thing to do, as Windex will modify the pH of your paint and cause more problems. That being said, if you're trying to bring back a paint, roughly around, if you get some distilled water, because you want to use a little bit of distilled water, half of that would be say you get a 20 ml bottle like this. Half of this will be distilled water. Half of it will be paint medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then you want a couple drops of ammonia in there. because this will help with the pH balance of it. If you're just doing it pure water and medium, you're going to get into some other issues. So mixing in a tiny little bit of ammonia will help with the neutralization of the pH and just getting it to where it needs to be.
But that's a few drops. So some people are like, it seems like they're like really thinning their paints with just straight Windex. So
yeah,
that's probably not a good thing to do.
No, that's not. The dye in the Windex, not that big of a deal. It's a dye. Dyes fade unlike some pigments. All dyes will fade. Most pigments will fade slower, if not, just not fade at all.
Gotcha.
So,
hey Wade and Dennis, thanks for coming. So Dennis is actually saying that he has watched some stuff on windshield washer fluid. So I would assume that's pretty much the exact same thing. I don't know if windshield washer fluid is like any different than Windex, isn't it? It's pretty much just something that doesn't freeze as easy.
I believe it's mostly ammonia and some things that don't, like some antifreeze and maybe some surfactants in there as well. I don't know that much.
So it's probably even worse.
Yeah.
Dennis, don't do that. You can watch it, but don't do it.
Oh,
Connor's World, thanks for stopping by. So if you guys got any questions, please feel free to ask them. Now, this is the big one, and I already know the answer to this, and I have had so many people tell me that they just thin their paints for their airbrush with IPA, like straight isopropyl alcohol. And it's hard for me to fathom how that's a good thing. So, like, am I right on that?
IPA destroys the binder. However, it is a secondary alcohol, so it's not going to be as bad as certain things. But why?
So it destroys the binder. What's like the long-term like things that it would actually do to your paints? Or is it an immediate thing where it's like you're going to get some bad reactions?
Well, the immediate thing is what's going to happen is you're going to have reduced durability, for one.
So it'll scratch off easy or flake off?
Yep. Because the binder has now been, the molecular bonds of the binder have now broken down because of the alcohol in there. A little bit of alcohol, not that big of a deal. Most pigments, or a lot of paints will use IPA as a catalyzer. So that is something. Some paints actually have quite a high resistance. Speaking about acrylic paint specifically, will have quite a high resistance to IPA because it needs it as a catalyzer to help stabilize it. But yeah, generally speaking, not something you should do.
And I've also heard that some people have tried it with certain paints and it'll clump up. Like, so is that just like the instantaneous of like it's just reacting to the paint?
It means that the wetting agent has been destroyed in it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Wetting agent, for those that don't know, is a surfactant that is specialized for paint. It's things like Oxgal or Oratan. You can buy in at craft stores like this one.
Yeah, Chris had the same. You've heard the same thing. Yeah, so it breaks down.
Yeah. So it will break down a lot of things. It can also break down the polymer binder in there. It's a microplastic, so it will destroy the bonds of it, and then it'll just cause more aggregates to build up sometimes, depending on the type that they're using. So
now I do use isopropyl alcohol sometimes to clean my airbrush, but never to mix paints. Like, it's always like an after the fact thing. Sometimes I'll use it and it'll clean it really well.
Oh yeah, I use it sometimes to clean my airbrush as well. So,
Silent Night, thanks for joining us. So we've got a question right here. So what is the best thinning ratio for paint? Doesn't that, I think it's really depending on the type of paint you're using. What kind of answer you've got for that?
Kind of, it does depend on the type of paint you're using. Generally speaking, more often than not, a 1-to-1 ratio for most paints will be fine. Now, that being said, you do have to be careful. A 1-to-1 ratio can actually be too much for some paints. And you'll want, for instance, 25% maximum on some binders. Now, Golden Acrylics on their website, justpaint.org, did a testing of how far you can thin a paint before it loses adhesion. You can do 100 parts water to 1 part paint and it'll still adhere. The durability is where it starts failing.
And I've noticed even on some of like my craft paints, like, you know, the dollar bottles, sometimes like I'll have different, like, say, I know for a fact my like yellow, I have to add like a bunch to like thin it down, but like some of them, like some of my blues and things like that, like it only takes a few drops, and it really just depends on the actual shade of it. So is it like the pigment mixtures that also plays a factor into it, or is it just how they manufacture it?
It kind of both right there. So that's where you get into kind of a complicated thing, especially with yellow.
Yellow's
And
a pain. Ugh.
You know what? I'm going to show you something really special right here. Show the entire stream this. Oop. See this black right here?
Yep.
My brush is wet. I'm going to wet it more. Put a little bit of yellow on there. This yellow right here. Too thin. Let's get a little bit more. So that was about a 3:1 ratio. How's that yellow?
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I do know like some like I know like this yellow right here, like from Army Painter, it works pretty well for me. Like I've noticed that some of these paints, the yellows, I mean, they are a pain. Yeah, wait, we got Connor's World. 100% yellow is a struggle. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep. And as you see, this yellow right here on camera is one coating black.
Wow.
And if we zoom in, not chunky. And that's thinned down too.
Wow. So what's the difference here? Like, what are we looking at?
That's a professional grade paint.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where certain yellow pigments will outperform others. With craft paint, with hobby paints, they're not going to be using the more expensive yellow pigments more often than not. They're going to be using something, for instance, PY3 Hansa Yellow G. Was it that's Hansa Yellow G something?
I'm not going to correct you, so it can be that.
But yeah, it's Hansa Yellow Lemon, effectively, which is, it's not a great pigment overall. It has a lot of problems when you try to get an opaque coat out of it. So how you get an opaque paint for a lot of these things out of a transparent thing is you mix in chalk.
Gotcha.
You mix in a little bit of titanium white, you mix in a little bit of chalk. Okay. So for instance, this right here, we'll use a lot of titanium white in here. That's how they do it. But they do something like a blue. Well, if you add in too much white, enough to make it opaque, you're just going to get a sky blue color. So the way to do that is you use calcium carbonate, chalk, which doesn't tint as much.
Gotcha.
It'll tint a little bit, but it'll augment it. It won't make it as bright as titanium white will.
Yeah, Brendan even said he's noticed with Vallejo paints, the thinning ratio depends on the color itself. And I have too. Like, it's exactly it. What I was talking about. Like, because I know I was using this as an example, but like my game colors, like it's the same exact thing. Because I even have some the game airbrush paints, and it's same thing too. Like sometimes I actually have to thin it a little more.
Oh yeah, my paints don't thin that much.
So Wade, you mentioned durability. In my area of work where stones are painted, lacquers are used. Is that both because of the pores, but also needs to be durable outside?
Yes. Simply put, lacquer, however, is most lacquers are going to be a nitrocellulose binder, which is fairly toxic. That being said, some are not. Lacquer used to come from a lac beetle, That's the reason why it's called lacquer historically. So older lacquers will not have that same durability as modern lacquers will. Keep that in mind when trying to use a lacquer, especially Japanese lacquer can be made out of the lac beetle, which will not have the same durability when it goes on stones. But modern ones, yeah, you're doing it because rocks are very porous. They absorb a lot of moisture, and you need a higher durability. And really, the only things you have for high durability are going to be lacquers, because enamel means nothing, by the way. You can thank DuPont for that.
So we've got Dennis. He's got a question. Is there certain colors that we should look for better quality?
So when it comes to paint, there's a lot of myths about hobby paint, okay? Hobby paint as a whole will be student grade. This means that it is a lower grade than something like a professional grade.
Mm-hmm.
There's only two grades, student and professional, and then there's intermediary grades between all of them. But certain colors for hobby paints are always going to be problematic. Oranges are always going to be problematic. Why? Because there's three current orange pigments. Pyrrole orange, which I have right here. Actually, I made this myself. So pyrrole orange is so bright that it actually doesn't show up on camera very well. It's so bright it actually you can see it during night.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a fairly expensive pigment too. This bottle alone would, if I was trying to sell it this 30 ml bottle, it'd be about $8 roughly. You can get a 4-ounce bottle of it for around $20-something from a reputable brand though. You'll have cadmium orange, which is it's a cadmium. Most people are scared of cadmium. And then you have a Pyrrhone orange, which is that orange as well. Very transparent, really a good orange, but
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey Matt, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, there's other orange pigments, but those are your main three. With yellow, there's a ton of yellow pigments. The main ones you're going to be finding are Hansa yellow. I have a Hansa yellow here somewhere, actually. I don't use it because it's not light fast.
Gotcha.
But the two main ones you're going to be using, that I'll be using, that are similar to Hansa, are going to be benzimidazoline. So benzimidazoline yellow is just like Hansa, except it's better in every aspect. It's easier to use. It is transparent, so you have to mix chalk in with it, stuff like that. There's two versions of it, a light and a medium. This is the medium. Then you have cadmium yellows, which are phenomenal. And the yellow I was using actually is from Golden. It's bismuth vanadate yellow.
So my question is, like, for a lot of us, like, we're using the, more affordable paints, and like some of us use like Vallejo or Citadel, different like brands like that. And we're all looking at like at the tops, like maybe like $4 or $5 a bottle. Like, is there any type of like paints out there that like are better quality that we could actually start looking at that we can get in stores or anything like that?
This 4-ounce bottle here. Want to take a guess how much this bottle costs?
I have no idea.
$11
for a 4-ounce bottle.
Yep.
Wow.
Of a professional paint.
So Golden. And is that something that's in stores somewhere, or do you have to like buy it online?
You can buy it online, but Jerry's, if you're in the US, Jerry's Artorama, Dick Blick, both of them are very huge art stores. You can get them both there. Golden can be gotten in most countries as well. It's one of the largest paint manufacturers, and they are the ones that actually invented acrylic paint. Fun fact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I know for like me, like I get by pretty well with this stuff. Like it works out well. It's usually when I'm dealing with like oranges and yellows and things like that. So like I personally could see me buying like some more of like that, like those specific types of paints just for those colors, just so I don't have to do all of these multiple coats and things like that. Like, because I don't know about you guys that are like watching, like, do you guys struggle, or have you found any specific like paints when it comes to like your yellows and stuff that just work great for you? Because I have a friend that got Pro Acryl, and he says that it works really well, and it's just a little bit more pricey than like Vallejo, and I'm wanting to try it out.
Yeah. Now, I tried a few Pro Acryl paints out, but the thing with professional paints that is actually important, the paints are based off of the pigment. That's how much they cost. For instance, this one will be $11 right here, $12. It's an opaque yellow, really nice. This one right here, the bismuth andate that I put on here, yeah, this bottle is $30 for 4 ounce. So this is actually a hobby price thing. I think it equals to, you're paying roughly $3.80 for a hobby size bottle, $3.80.
Yeah.
So really that same ballpark, but you're just buying it in bulk.
Well, Dennis says that Michael's actually has had golden. So if for those that are in the U.S. with the Michael's.
Yeah,
Thanks for that, Dennis.
Michael's does carry golden. However, they don't have a discount on it. So yeah, really need to use that coupon.
Get those coupons, folks.
Yeah.
So Matt, you said you have a medium yellow from Vallejo Air that you love. Like, yeah, I have the is it the Game Air or is it just Vallejo Air? I know I've got the Game Air, and the yellow does pretty decent. When airbrushing, I find I do a lot better when I'm airbrushing, but when I'm using a brush for this stuff, that's when it's like 8 coats in and I can still see like the my primer or base coat.
Oh yeah. That's always going to be the issue because, as I said, most yellows are transparent. So
yeah,
if you airbrush it, it just will, the coats will be more even.
Just Vallejo Air is what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. So let's get into the next question I've got for you. And the one thing is I like in my like paint desk, I actually have a little blow dryer, like a hair dryer. And it's got like toggle modes to be able to just blow air. And that's what I do. Like I use it to just like blow cold air over top of it when I'm in a rush. So I want to like dry that. Now, my question is threefold. Is it okay to just blow dry it with just cold air? Or is it good to do it with hot air? Like obviously for us that are painting with like PLA or something, we're going to have to keep it away and not melt it. Or is it better to just air dry and just be patient, which is, I know, hard for me sometimes, but I don't know about you guys like watching if you just would rather just sit and watch it dry. But like, what's the best method there? Like, or what do you get from doing those things?
So you can dry it with heat and you can dry it with a blow dryer. It's best to let it air dry. That's the best thing because the longer it takes to dry, the smoother it'll get. The quicker it takes to dry, the more texture you'll have. So if you're looking to get texture, maybe using, a blow dryer or something like that is a good thing. That being said, try not to do heat as acrylics are a thermoplastic. And yeah, that's just not a good thing. Oop, I just threw my brush.
So just blow drying it will get like some type of texture, and I actually have experimented with that because we've already talked a little bit about that, and I have noticed I do get textures sometimes on like a smooth surface and I'm blowing it, and if it air dries, if I just stop what I'm doing and come back, it will be just completely smooth like it was airbrushed on there. Oh, yeah. So I have noticed that. We got one question here. Hey, I have a question regarding paints. Is there any difference between normal acrylic paints and model paint? Here in India, it's too difficult to get model paint. I assume it's paint. Yeah,
so there is not. A lot of the model paints, that's all just marketing. You'll hear some things online like, oh, model paints are higher technology. They're not. So when it comes to grind size, it's an incredibly complicated science. And to basically explain that, the lowest grind size you'll ever see is actually only going to come from a few brands. One of them is Michael Harding. This is an oil paint. Keep that in mind. But Michael Harding, this tube alone, this is one of their cheapest tubes they sell. This is $16.
Wow.
This is an incredibly expensive paint because to get that grind size, that very, very fine grind size, it takes hours and hours of machine time.
When you say grind size, is that the pigment or is that
Yes.
something else like the chalk or whatever is used in things? Like, so it's the pigment grinding?
Right.
Okay.
Most companies will just put it through a single 3-roll press and call it a day. The 3-roll press will not really get it to a smaller grind size, but it'll break up the aggregates and just make everything a little bit more uniform.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
So I hope that answered your question. So when one of the things that, if anybody has any questions, please ask them. One of the big things here, and this is the biggest thing for me that I probably get the most shade for, and that is I hate wearing gloves when it comes to holding my models and painting them, because people comment or email me or tell me that I should be wearing a glove because the oils in my fingers are going to mess up my paints and the model. And I have never really experienced any issues because when I'm painting, I've always got clean hands when I start, at least. I'll get paint on them while I'm doing it, but I've never had any issues with that. So, like, is there something to that? Like, should I be wearing gloves? Because I hate wearing them.
You don't need to. Let's put on a glove right here. Okay.
So
I just rubbed all the paint off. Okay, let's try it here. Rubbed all the paint off again. Gloves will actually make it worse for you. They will lower your dexterity. They will, in fact, not help at all because the oils in your hands aren't as destructive as people want to believe they are when it comes to paint. It's the heat that's actually more of a problem because, as I said, these are thermoplastics. So holding it for too long in a certain place will heat up the plastic and make it a little bit more, weak. It's not that much weaker, but it's weak enough to where you'll notice it. So a glove like this, that I just ripped, it's not going to have much thermal protection, for one. And then these will also increase the amount of friction. If you look up any bulk restore, the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, they don't actually use gloves with any of their 400-plus-year-old books because it will actually destroy them if they do. If that says anything.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So you don't need to have gloves. Like, I can just throw them away. No, but I actually use gloves when I'm airbrushing because that is completely different in my eyes because, like, I don't want to get paint all over myself because, like, when I'm using some of my primers, like, they're hard to get off. But
oh yeah,
it is so refreshing to hear that I should not be wearing gloves, and it's just I don't have to. And Connor's World, a super thanks. Thank you so much. $5. Thank you both for the painting details. I have some big projects coming up, and this will save my prints and time. This has amplified my paint game. Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm glad that I knew this was going to be a great conversation because Corpse Starch has so much knowledge. I have picked his brain so much, and I'm just glad we were able to do this today.
I'm glad to be here too. It's always a pleasure to discuss paints, and there's so many weird things about paints that people don't know, and some don't even believe. So.
Well, I know nobody's probably still going to believe me, and I'm probably still going to get comments of like wear gloves, and that statement has made my day because I love it.
Oh yeah, I can actually freak a lot of people out if I show people I have a kilogram of pigment right here. Okay, this is a kilogram of pigment, very common pigment used in most paints. Okay, if I flip this over and show you the label, it will freak most people out. It's got a really nasty hazard label on it.
Really?
Contains lead.
Oh.
You don't have to worry about that, though. That's a legal thing. Because most pigments come from dirt, there's always that chance a little bit of lead is going to be in there, but that's washed, that's properly prepared. It's from a really high-end company that caters to art conservation. So they'll put that label on there, but gold, if you see something like, let me grab golden burnt umber, it'll say here, this product contains lead. It's less than 0.001% in there. It's not even detectable. It's just a legal requirement because of California.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So,
little fun fact.
Have another question here. Aloha. I have a question about airbrushing craft paints. It clogs my needle even when I water it down a lot. Please help. So, could you let us know what kind of acrylic paints you're using? Because that might help too. But
yeah.
If you're thinning your paints with water, distilled water, because that's, if you missed the beginning, we were talking about using distilled water is the second best thing that you could use. The first is deionized water, but that's a little harder to get. But I honestly, if it clogs, you might even want to make sure that your airbrush is properly cleaned, because I know that's happened to me quite a few times, and it turned out that I didn't actually get my airbrush clean enough, and it just kept catching in a certain area. So it's really a nice thing to be able to completely disassemble your entire airbrush, break it down, and then if you just kind of, I will soak mine in either Windex solution or some kind of cleaning solution, and for a couple hours, and then I'll scrub it and clean it and blow it all out. And that sometimes can be it, because if you don't properly clean it, that paint still in there will just keep sticking to more paint, and it'll clog you.
That is also with craft paint, a little bit of flow improver, specifically with apple barrel. Apple barrel for craft paint isn't bad.
That's what I got. That's what I used to. It's strange you're having that issues, but I would check your airbrush maybe, and especially that happens really easily with smaller needle sizes too. So you want to make sure that you get your paints a lot thinner than you think you need when you get a lot smaller of a needle, because it's got to really flow through that tiny little nozzle.
Yeah. Now, this is going to get, I'm not going to get fully into this, but each pigment will also have a very specific size, and certain pigments cannot go through the nozzle of certain different things. Like I have a Hutter & Steinbeck Infinity right here.
Yep,
I use
I've
a
got the same one.
Yep, I use a 0.15 needle as my everyday beater. And certain pigments like chromium oxide can't go through that needle without clogging it. And this is from a professional thing, because the pigment size is much larger. And it will form aggregates.
Oh, that makes sense, because I've had some paints that I know I don't use because in that specific airbrush, but I can use them in a bigger needle.
Yep.
So here we've got some more questions here. What's the best type of paintbrush the best type of paintbrush is best acrylic paints to use for acrylic paints? Honestly, for me, I've got some nicer ones that I use, but they're just, I got them at a hobby store and spent maybe $20 on a set of 4 or 5. But most of the time, if I was in my studio, I'd grab them. I get the big pack at Walmart of the little blue handled stuff. The tips of the brushes don't last very long, but I get a bunch of brushes. The more affordable ones, I can do just as good as more of the expensive ones. But my more expensive ones, they're the ones that have more of the smaller, finer point, your 000s and things like that. But what do you think, Corpse Starch? I don't personally. I'll use any kind of paintbrush. It doesn't really matter to me. I think it's how you use it. But
so that's, as you see, this is my brush set. I have a lot of very expensive brushes. My favorite brush brand, my brush is these right here. These are Escoda Reserva. They're incredibly hard to get. They're incredibly expensive brushes. I love them to death. These are for my oil paints. I use synthetics with my acrylics because acrylics have are too alkaline for sable hair brushes, and will actually destroy the hairs.
Yeah, those are the ones that I use. I don't use any natural hair brush bristles or anything like that. They're all synthetic brushes.
If I am using a sable hair for it, I'm using a low end brush like a Winsor Newton Series 7, which yes, those are actually low end brushes.
Here's one. Matt's got a question. Some of the paints that I have from my local dollar store, when I thin them for my airbrush, they are dry, really chalky. When it gets dry, they're chalky. Is there anything he can do to prevent that?
Not really. So the reason why they're drying chalky is because they use chalk.
There you go, Matt.
Simple point. Yeah. Now, there are ways to get around that, but honestly, if you're going that far, you're going to be spending more money to fix them than just buying something like Createx or Golden High Flow.
Gotcha.
Like Golden High Flow, most of the colors that you'll want are going to be around for this size bottle are going to be, $11, $12. Some will be, in the $20 range, but most are going to be around there. The only one in the higher end one that you'll ever want is Quinacridone Magenta, PR122. And I can show everyone a really fun experiment with it later on too.
So Dennis, we got questions. We're trying to get through these. Dennis asks, should we always strain our paints before going into the airbrush? Yes, 100% yes. Because you don't know. I will say this. When it comes to this stuff especially, even the other bottled paints, once you start using this down, there's air in here and it'll start drying and start clumping and things like that. So like if you squeeze that out, you will be mixing in those clumps, and you want to strain your paints always before you go into your airbrush.
I have this to actually prove that point too. So this is a hobby primer that people rave about and say you don't ever need a strain. You see how there's certain parts in here that aren't reflecting the light? Yeah, that's dried paint.
Yeah.
This bottle is completely sealed, by the way.
Yeah, I strain all my paints, and Dennis, you absolutely want to, or you're going to get all kinds of clogs, and you're going to have to tear it apart. Because
here's a big bottle of Stynol Riz.
Yeah, here. So like in this, you see along that edge, that is dried paint. Even though there's still a lot of wet paint in this, it'll dry out. Like, and that's the biggest problem when you've got bigger bottles. Like some of the smaller ones, like you'll still have the same thing, but you definitely want to get some strainers.
This right here is incredibly high-end ink from Holbein. As you see, that's not pigment, that's just dried ink.
Yeah.
Certain things will dry out. Certain paints will dry out much faster than others as well. It depends on the pigment. So, and straining is very important. You should always strain your paint.
All right. So, question: what are some of the ways to prevent brush marks when painting by hand? I mostly airbrush, but sometimes I need to apply the paint with a regular brush. Honestly, that's just thinning your paints. I will take distilled water, and I will typically do anywhere between a 25% to 50% mixture, honestly. It depends on how thick you want it, but you thin your paints that way, you can mix it together, and then that'll work. And then the other thing is exactly what Corpse Starch has right there, and that is a wet palette. Wet palettes can help a lot. You want to explain the wet palette to him?
So a wet palette will prevent your paint from drying. It does not. It should not be thinning your paint. If it's thinning your paint, that means that the paper that you have here is too low quality for the paint. Should just be providing slight moisture. Mm-hmm. That being said, I do have something right here. This little dot right there. That's not water that I'm using to help thin my paints. That's alcohol ethoxylate. That's a flow improver. It's certain flow improvers when you're brush painting will actually provide a better job and help paints flow better. Certain flow improvers like 2-butoxyethanol, that's a very common one that's listed as non-toxic, by the way, but it's actually quite toxic. That's in a lot of paints. For instance, Duncan Roads Tooth and Coats, they get that coverage so well because they mix in 2-butoxyethanol to it. So a little bit of flow improver when you're brush painting will actually do more for your brush painting than it will when you're airbrushing.
So I use this flow improver. It's just Vallejo airbrush flow improver.
Yep,
and I find it works pretty well.
Yep.
And also the one thing with a wet palette as well, you got more control of the amount of paint you actually put on your brush. And that will also help with paint strokes, because if you don't, it'll help you not overload your brush, because you can kind of like get a little bit on there and wipe it and then get a little bit of moisture in there and it'll flow on your models a lot better. Yep. So can I mix a gloss in it? So Matt, I assume we're talking about like any kind of your like the more affordable like dollar store paints. You're wanting to mix a gloss into it. And
yeah, you can mix a gloss medium into some of those things and it can help. It's not going to be helping that much in reality. That's going to be the bane of craft paints as a whole, where they have a lot of filler in them. That's the main difference between a student grade craft paint and a professional grade, is the amount of filler. All paints will have filler in there. Some marketing will say pure pigment. If it's an actual pure pigment paint, it's not good. But
so you want that, you have to have some of that in there.
Right. You have to have some level of filler. It can be different things, like a biocide is technically a filler. You have different stabilizing agents. You have a ton of different things that can go in your paint. Chalk is also used for a lot of paints to kind of help with certain other things. When you see the super like gritty, super chalky paint, that's probably because they're adding something called kaolin or kaolinite in there. And that is the bane of my existence. I will go on very long, very vulgar rants about kaolin.
How about a PC version? What's wrong with it?
So it is used in medicine to dry blood and stop blood clots, or to cause blood clots on an open wound. If that says the problem right there.
Ooh.
Yeah. You put it in paint, makes a really good. It's used as a mattening agent. A lot of craft paints will use it too. And it's a matte agent. It's an opacifier. It does double duty. It's super cheap. You can make a really cheap paint with it instead of having to go get your fumed silica to get that super matte look. Higher end paints like Golden here, they're so flat. We'll use things like fumed silica or plastic particles, stuff like that. Very specialized plastic particles to matten their paints, but this is really expensive compared to kaolin, which as a consumer you can buy for like $11 a kilogram. This means a company who makes paint is probably paying like 70 cents per kilogram, something around there. So compared to the fumed silica, where that cost me $20 a kilogram.
It's those things that that's how paint companies cut costs, by like using different agents and things like that.
Yep.
Because I found that there's certain kinds, like when it comes to like folk art, apple barrel, and stuff like that, they sometimes, like depending on the pigments and things like that, like I'll get one of my apple barrel colors, I forget which one it is, but I actually have it marked because it'll get so chalky, like Matt was saying, and like then some of them, like even some of the blacks will they get almost like a satin or almost glossy when none of the other paints have that. So I have to be really careful about using certain paints, even if it's in the same paint line. I've noticed that they will give me different finishes, which is that's also part of the things that you're talking about, like what they're using to make those.
Yep.
So basically the paint companies use different formulas for different colors because of the pigments, if I'm understanding that.
Correct. Different pigments will need different levels of filler to make it more opaque. And the whole thing is lower paints tend to be more opaque because opaque paint much easier to paint with than transparent paints. It's that simple. That being said, the two most problematic paints for craft paints, black and white, you can go, if you spend a little bit more money, if you're willing to go spend like, $11 on a 4-ounce bottle, it's going to change everything.
Yeah, I'm going to be picking up some of this stuff because I am extremely curious by it, because if I can get 1 or 2 coats of yellow, oh, my life would change. And I'm sure it would change a lot of the people watching too, because yellow is the bane of my existence.
This right here, golden titanium white. So this is their high flow, so this is going to be a little bit glossier. Let me show you something on stream. Entire stream. Right out of the bottle, this is an ink, keep in mind. So this is basically the thinness that you want directly out of the bottle. Paints are thicker because of opacifiers, not pigment. Black.
Wow. So within 2 coats, you would be completely covered.
Yep.
That's interesting. That is... Wow.
Yep.
I hope you guys are like enjoying this conversation, and like if you guys have more questions, just bring them on. Because I find this really interesting, especially just like understanding that background of like, because like our hobby is like we're using this stuff all the time, and it's like, is there other things that we could be using? Because it's like, okay, yeah, I spend like, if this was a yellow bottle, I would spend like $1.20 on this, but if I spent $11 or something like that to buy another yellow that would save me more time in the long run, it makes it just so much worth it. Like I think that's so awesome.
Yeah. When you get to the higher end yellows that are, in the $20-$30 range, that's where it's kind of like, maybe like the Bismuth Vanadate, as I said, $30 for this bottle right here. It's worth it for me.
Yeah.
If I'm using this on a commission, I'm getting paid $1,000.
So Dennis, basically no more craft paints. And okay, so I will say this, even with this knowledge, I'm still going to use craft paints, Dennis. But I might be buying a couple of these bottles just for specific colors, because if I can get like a nice white where when I'm doing it on black and just like 1 or 2 coats, it's done, then I think that's totally worth it. But I think for like all of the other stuff of like when I'm doing some of these, other paints, I don't have any real issues with them. But I think that's a personal preference. And if you have the money, go for it. But I know I like to keep things on the cheap because I can spend a couple $100 and get a lot of paints if I have to. But it's really on your personal situation, I think, what that really is boiling down to.
Yeah, and I'm the one sitting here who I can afford the really fancy paints, and I can tell you if they're worth it or not. Because, so for my job, this is a bottle that I have to have. This is a bottle of lapis lazuli. This is the natural, genuine ultramarine blue. This small bottle here is $150.
Wow.
That's
yeah,
not
but
even
for your
the most
line of work,
I
totally get it for your line of work because you're restoring old paintings and things like that. And I just find it really interesting of like how you're you're like preserving or restoring these old paintings, but like you're on the paint chemistry side of things and like understanding how these work so you can recreate the same paints and things like that. I think it's awesome. And Dennis, I don't understand the wet palette. Going to have to research more. Yeah, wet palettes are great. And Dennis, we could even like talk about that more in the Patreon group, and I can go over like how I use it and things like that. But they are something, especially I love my wet palette when I have like a multiple day project, because they have a cover on them and you can keep all of your paint still wet, especially when you're using like your more like expensive paints. And I'm comparing my expensive paints to me, not him, because when you're showing us literally like over $100 bottle of pigment.
Oh, here. I'll just do this right here. So this right here, this is every single version of ultramarine ever created.
Wow.
4 of these bottles haven't been produced since 1960. Guess how much those cost?
I'd rather not know, because my goodness.
Yeah, here's a little fun thing. Can you guess what color this is right here?
It almost looks purple.
It's a blue.
Huh.
This is because colors will have a blue, for instance, everyone thinks cold tone. Well, it can have a warm tone version of it. That's a warm tone. The pigment, for instance, ultramarine blue will come in a red shade and a green shade. The green shade will lean more towards, the turquoise, the teal. The blue shade will lean towards more, violet, purple range. And that's basically it. So if you're trying to mix colors, the key thing is trying to know exactly what temperature the pigment is.
Yeah.
That's the reason why you can get, for instance, you grab an ultramarine right here and you mix it with this yellow right here, it will turn into kind of a muddy color, right? A muddy green, like so, all right? But you grab a different blue. Here's a blue. This is phthalo blue green shade, all right? Grab this. And you get a much different green.
Wow.
Because the blue here is leaning more towards the green spectrum. So
interesting. So Dennis has got another one. I'm just starting to airbrush. What should I use to practice? Would better paint make it easier? Personally, and I'll let Corpse Starch answer this too, but I don't think so. I think as long as you can thin your paints properly, I don't think it's going to matter when you're practicing and things like that. Like, I know I like to, I'll use like, I have the Vallejo Game Air or just Vallejo Air. Like I know Matt said he has, like, those are nice because you can just dropper them right in. But I use a lot of this stuff still. Like I said, just because I know all of this doesn't mean I'm going to go spend thousands of dollars on some new paint, but I'm probably going to go buy some of like a few select bottles of like my most popular colors that I use a lot. But you're still going to have to learn how to thin your paints properly to be able to airbrush. And that's really what it is. Why is dry brushing called dry? It has nothing to do with dry. Dry brushing is you're basically removing a lot of the wetness out of your brush, and that's really I think why it's called dry brushing. Because you're removing a lot of it, but still that paint is still on the brushes, or the bristles. So when you're dry brushing, it's just getting anything left, leaving it on your model. So it's kind of when you hit those high spots, it's kind of dragging it and pulling it off of the bristles. But when you're really dry brushing well, like it's barely got anything on it, and your bristles should be pretty, like they feel dry. I hope that answered it. I don't know. Corpse Starch, do you do a lot of dry brushing for your models and stuff that you paint?
Yeah, I actually do a lot of dry brushing, but for different reasons. I even do dry brushing with oil paint.
Oh, okay.
Yep. you let the oil paint sit out for a few days, and you do a dry brush with it. And it works because there's a bunch of texture already on the canvas. You're trying to highlight that texture, stuff like that. With acrylics, I do it a lot with our models and stuff like that because it's a good technique to know as a whole. But yeah, your explanation is pretty much on point. So,
Kodesh, thank you so much for the $5 super thanks. Appreciate it. Glad we were able to answer that for you. And Dennis, it's never too late, man. You should have paid attention in art class. Never too late. You're learning all kinds of stuff today.
Oh, yeah.
But so if does anybody have any more questions for Corpse Starch or myself? Because we're coming up on the hour, and thought we'd just keep this nice, short and sweet conversation. I think we covered a lot in this, and I just want to say thank you, because you really enlightened us on quite a few things. And most importantly for me, no glove. I don't have to wear a glove, but the heat in my fingers, that is the biggest thing that I have taken away from this. So yep. I don't typically hold my models forever because I'm always moving it. So the heat in your fingers can actually mess with the paint, not the actual oils. That's my favorite thing. You made my day.
Oh yeah, but look, I'm rubbing my finger against this. You notice how much quicker it was with the glove to remove the paint?
Because of the more friction?
Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah.
You're vindicated.
I'm vindicated. Oh. But yeah, so thank you. Appreciate you for stopping by, and Dennis, thank you. Thank you for the super chat. Thanks for this. I need a shopping list. So I am actually going to talk with Corpse Starch after this and get the exact stuff that he was mentioning, and I will put that in the description of the video. So look for that to come. And then also, Dennis, I can connect with you and talk to you more about the wet palette in the Patreon group. Yep. But Matt, thanks a lot for coming. Corpse Starch, is there anything else that you wanted to say or do? And also, let me put Corpse Starch's information right here. So I just put it in the comment. His YouTube channel. I've watched some of his stuff. What was it, like a 3-hour stream of talking with a paint company? And man, I was like, the water was like rising. I was like, I'm drowning. I have no idea what they're talking about at certain parts because they were getting in the weeds of this. But some of the stuff they were talking about was really interesting.
Oh yeah, the discussion of the Nexo pigment was just like, I love that, but I got so many responses of, what's the Nexo?
That is like, there's like nerd level, and then whatever that was, it was like way up here. But yeah, so I put his information right there. You guys go ahead and give him a follow. He's growing his channel, and he's got some good stuff on there, and I just see more good stuff coming because he's got a lot of information for us out there in this hobby. So I just wanted to say thank you for being on here with me and nerding up about paints and things like that.
It's been great to be on here. As I said, I absolutely love nerding up about paints, just talking about paints as a whole. Any chance I get to expand the knowledge of the pigment nerd side, because my community is very small. The pigment nerds are small. There's like 3 YouTubers. Me,
well, it's something you don't really think about, like, right. And I know like a lot of people like just got like learned some stuff that they weren't even aware of today. So yeah, it was great. But thank you everybody for stopping in and watching and commenting. It was a great stream, and we'll see you guys next time. All right.
Good night, everyone.
We'll see ya.
Bye.